Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Today's conversation is with Linda Fane. Linda is what's called an Agile Coach and Facilitator, and you'll learn more about what that means during our conversation. But what makes Linda so special to me is that she's also a longtime Buddhist practitioner and a teacher. I first met Linda years ago through the Kadampa Meditation Center in Seattle. Over the years, we've gotten to know each other not only through the center, but through some wonderful walks we've had, through social events, and we've even spent time on the racquetball court. Though I don't get to see her nearly as much as I'd like to, I do consider her a very dear friend and cherish our time together. And you'll understand why once you listen to this episode. Linda has a really level-headed approach to life, and she's also full of heart and love. And that comes through not only when you spend time with her in person, but also in this chat, which you'll hear. For a little background, I've been interested in Buddhism for a very long time. It probably dates back to my travels to Southeast Asia when I was in my early 20s. I was captured by the gentle spirit of the Thai and Vietnamese people, and I've always associated this very gentle being of theirs to their Buddhist practices. And I'll just say, too, that the way that they practice Buddhism in Thailand and Vietnam, and really in all countries, it's all very nuanced and very different. For many years, I was a book Buddhist. I just read about it and I tried to meditate here and there. And it wasn't until my husband John and I heard a Buddhist nun speak at an event in Seattle that I was interested in learning much more. During this talk, this very insightful nun, her name is Genla Dekyang, she said, "Meditation brings peace of mind brings happiness." And I thought, that is not such a bad thing at all. I want some of that. Genla Dekyang is part of the new Kadampa tradition. She's actually now the general spiritual director. And they have a temple in Seattle. So John and I started going to that temple regularly on Monday nights when they have a general program. And that's where you meditate and you listen to Dharma teachings. Some wonderful teachers there. This has led me to being a meditator on a fairly regular basis. And I've also become quite intrigued with the effects of meditation on the brain and the body. And there's a lot of studies that are being done now, just really in recent years. And I'll add some links to more information in the show notes about that kind of mind-body connection with the meditation. For me, meditation and the study of Buddhism has become very important in my life. And the interesting thing is that it doesn't matter what religion you come from or what religion you currently practice, there's always room for meditation and the insight that's taught in Buddhism. My conversation with Linda will start in just a moment, but before that, I wanted to invite you to check out our Trips on Wander Tours. This is where we feature women-only tours to a number of destinations, including Southeast Asia, India, Papua New Guinea, and those are actually co-ed trips, and Ireland. I'm now working on future trips to Africa and South America. And for those who would like something in the U.S., we've got culinary tours to Santa Fe, New Orleans, and Seattle. So with that, enjoy this conversation with Buddhist teacher Linda Fane. What many people may not realize about Buddhist teachers is that many of them are not ordained. They're lay people. They're just like you and I. They wear jeans and blouses and jackets and carry purses and backpacks. And yet there's something very special that I find about these people who've dedicated so much of their time to teaching others about their Buddhist practice. Not only am I impressed with how much information they can contain in their brain, because it's beyond me. Really, Buddhism can be quite complicated. They've got the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Five Moral Precepts, etc., etc. And in addition to all that, Buddhists in general hold themselves to a standard that includes being compassionate and kind to all living beings. Now, it's called a path for a reason. It's a path, not a perfection, and that's how I like to think of myself. I'm always learning. I'm always trying to improve and be more conscientious. I'm definitely not perfect, so I am on the path. We'll spend some time with Linda today to understand how one maintains a peaceful mind and pursues happiness. particularly at a time when there's a lot of chaos in the world. So I think we could all use a little bit of that. So, Linda, because today's episode is about Buddhism, let's actually start with the present. Tell me a little bit about your current affiliation with the Buddhist Center and also your career. As I mentioned, you're an Agile team coach. So how your career and your Buddhist practice intertwine.
Okay. So I am currently a senior teacher with the Kadampa Buddhist Center in Ballard, Washington, in a sleepy Scandinavian fishing village with the Buddhist Center. So I'm currently teach a branch in West Seattle. So Kadampa Buddhism is really modern Buddhism. It's a practical path, and because of that, we have branches in every neighborhood here in Seattle, so people can just actually walk within their neighborhood and find regular meditation practice. It might be just once a week. They come to our Monday night, for example, in West Seattle, and that's their spiritual practice. So we develop not only kind of regularity, but also a community.
A Sangha.
Yeah, a Sangha within a neighborhood. So as far as my path, I remember I was in my kind of mid-20s, and I was at that point where you're starting to get jaded. You have like the youthful vigor, and then as you start to get to your 30s, I just felt like my heart was closing. Like I actually consciously felt like I don't want to become jaded, and I want to develop compassion and have it be something that is present all the time. So I actually, on the back of the Seattle Weekly, cut out this little notice that said Buddhist meditation class, and was clutching it and coming in from the cold to this weekly meditation class. I was in the U District at the time, and that's where I met my first teacher, Genjang Sim. And basically that first teaching was universal compassion. And the main point of the teaching was that Buddha taught that compassion is something that if you give it, you actually have more of it. So you give compassion and it actually fills up your well of compassion. And to me, that was this radical economics. We have been taught in a capitalist society where you give something and you lose it. So that the idea that if you give something to someone else and you actually, it expands your own abundance, I really liked that. It was wonderfully subversive for me. So I just kept going probably for 6 years on Monday nights. And then I got into the more structured study program called Foundation Program. And then eventually teacher training program that I've been on probably about 5 or 6 years. And from there I was asked to teach this regular class. And so I've been studying for over 20 years and teaching for about 10 years. And right now, my teaching, I feel like, is part of my path. I have a group of people that I teach every week, and it's like a pop quiz for me. It's like, here I'm going, and I get to meditate as well. And I also get to teach the wisdom of Buddha, like bring this ancient wisdom that's been road tested over 2,500 years, bring it right to the people in my neighborhood in a very practical way that they can actually connect with it and apply it and have it be medicine for their own minds. Mm-hmm. It's pretty amazing the impact, the power of Buddha's wisdom when it's not abstracted to an intellectual level, but you learn enough just to be able to then practice it and meditate, and what I call like cooking it on your own stove of your mind, and then that's like the active ingredient for transformation.
So I do want to hear about how you apply that to your work, but I also want to know, because you've brought it up a couple times, the practical path, because I just love that phrase. Can you give me an example of how, when you've got a group of people and you may not know their all of their situations.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of advice can you give to someone, or what comes out in a teaching that you would consider to be practical on just kind of a general population daily level?
Well, what's interesting, you say like there's so many different types of people, but what's interesting is we all have some of the basic negative trains of thought, and we've been having these since the Buddhist times. These.
Not me.
Oh, not you. Oh, well, good. I'm glad I thought you said you weren't perfected, but anyway, we'll get to that later. But human beings have basic these like repetitive negative trains of or habits of mind. So even though I'll teach a group of people I've never met before, I know that there's some things that we all share. So an example of practical wisdom is, one of my favorites is everybody gets annoyed, everybody gets impatient, and that's a laboratory that allows the mind of anger to arise. So we get impatient, we reject things, and then we have mental pain. So that's pretty common across the board. So an example of practical wisdom that came from Buddha and through this meditative master called Shantideva is the idea of applying the opponent to anger, which in Buddhism is patience. Or what I like to emphasize is actually patient acceptance. So patient acceptance is the antidote to anger. So your normal triggers of anger, let's say, especially during the times with your family, for instance, you just set off each other's buttons. Instead of just going down your usual train of thought, which ends with anger and frustration and mental pain, you think there are different ways to intervene. So you intervene with the mind of patient acceptance instead. And the reason why I emphasize acceptance, because what you do first is you accept the behavior. Let's say you have a family member that criticizes you, and they just harp on you. You first need to say, I accept that this is happening. Not I like it, but I accept.
Mm-hmm. You recognize it.
Yeah, I practice patient acceptance. This is happening. Because the brilliance in what Buddha taught is that it's the rejection of things that are happening that actually causes the pain. We try to push it away, but just I accept. I accept that, my mother is overly critical. Then, once you accept a problem, you can actually solve it.
How do you find that pause? Because that's great in theory, but we are also reactionary. How do you find the pause to even recognize that?
Well, that's why they call it training. You have to train your mind, just like you would train for something, let's say, a fire in your house. You would have to, okay, this is where the fire extinguishers are. These are the exits. You don't just hope that will happen,
Mm-hmm.
In the moment, because it doesn't.
Would you say that that's where meditation comes
Yes,
in? Okay.
meditation is the method of training.
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is you imagine, you bring to mind that feeling of patient acceptance and have it become an old friend. It becomes a familiarity. Right now our familiarity is with rejecting and with getting annoyed and frustrated and then retaliating. That's our familiarity. It's not like that's necessarily kind of more important in mind. It's just one that we're more familiar with. So anger comes naturally. Patient acceptance you train in. And the way that you get energy to train in it is to really be sick and tired of what Buddha called the delusions of anger, just making you miserable. So there has to be almost a little bit like hitting, a little bit of, I'm tired of being angry at my family. So you have to have that energy that says, I want to try a new method. So to train in patient acceptance, you would actually bring to mind in meditation a mind that accepts wholeheartedly whatever arises, having given up the idea that things should be any other way. I accept wholeheartedly whatever arises, having given up the idea that things should be any other way. So then you hold that, and that should, you recognize that should mind is the trigger to anger. So you just think, I let go, I accept wholeheartedly whatever arises. And then you use that as a new starting point. So then accepting, you can start to then look, that gives you that pause. I accept, and then you can start to look, how do I want to respond? So meditation gives you the means to make decisions where previously it just went on autopilot. So you have to be, that's where consciousness and intentionality comes in.
So when you're meditating, because for folks who aren't meditators, it might be a really big leap for them, but the idea is, and please correct me, it's just kind of my understanding and my experience, is that if I consistently meditate and I learn how to focus my mind, I do have more room for a pause later in the day. If I get mad when I'm in traffic, I can kind of remember the practice and remember that I can focus elsewhere rather than focusing on the red lights, the red tail lights in front of me, and just kind of bring it back to something different.
Just to be more precise, is that meditation starts with mindfulness, and mindfulness is awareness. Then from that awareness, you can make a decision where to focus. So it's not like you're trying to focus and distract yourself. You're actually becoming aware. Okay, this is the storm front that's coming into my mind.
Yeah, it's a lot easier for me to distract myself and turn on some upbeat music.
Yes.
But
then you turn off the music, what happens?
Right.
You haven't. So the awareness through meditation, what you want to do is just actually start to look at things and look at what's going on in your mind. And that awareness then gives you kind of a lay of the land. And also what happens is when you're looking at a mind, it doesn't like the shiny lights of awareness. So when you start looking at your anger, for instance, it doesn't show up well in the lights. Let me just say, you're just like, ooh, that's yucky. That feels yucky. That looks like, oh my gosh, somebody else might like that. Really, that's the way that I just presented myself to that person, that they're going to have an aversion. So we start to see clearly that mind. And then through meditation is once you get clarity and awareness usually through basic breathing meditation. So you're really just starting to guide your mind inwards. And then you can meditate. One of the meditations I teach is clarity of the mind. You just simply watch the thoughts as they arise and dissipate without following them. So you're kind of seeing how you're, what state of mind you're in. Then you make a decision. I want to focus instead on a patient acceptance, for instance. I accept. And sometimes I even mentally say, I accept, and then just hold that feeling of that mind of acceptance. And then all of a sudden that becomes your go-to mind. You are now familiar with it. You go, hey, I want to go to that place. I accept. And it might even just be a trigger. I accept. And that gives you space. So once you accept, then let's say, for instance, this scenario where you're with your family, you can then say, I'm going to choose what's going to come out of my mouth next. Or I'm going to choose really just to let it go. But that's an intention. And then that's how you can change your responses.
To go back to your awareness point, and I loved what you just said. That's amazing. There's a TED Talk by a gentleman, and he talks about being able to get people to stop smoking, not by telling them how bad it is for them, it's going to kill them, it's disgusting. He just says, smoke, but be aware of the inhale. Be aware of what you're doing. And what happens is people become aware of actually what is going on with the smoke going into their body, and then they end up quitting just because of the awareness. It's not just a habit. It's,
exactly.
Right.
That blazing light of awareness. And another example is like a box of chocolates. If there's a box of chocolates just there on the counter, you're more likely to eat them. But if somebody says, can I offer you a chocolate? You're conscious minds, no, I am on a diet. Like you give it a chance to make a decision because somebody's offered it to you, and then there's like, so I find that's just a personal thing. I find that it's easier, like if somebody says, hey, do you want me to bake you a cake? Oh no. But if there's a cake there, you'll eat it because it's just you're actually not making a decision. You're not making a choice. So awareness allows us to make decisions, which allow us to then make choices. And if you think about it, people would not choose to be miserable. So the mind of anger, for instance, makes us miserable. So if we would not choose to have that mind of anger if we were given a choice. So mindfulness and awareness helps to elevate thoughts, so that we then are making choices.
That reminds me of an example that I use often. It's like I travel out of the country often, and when I go into a grocery store, I'll go into a tiny grocery store in another country, and there's so few food options there. And then I come back here and I walk into the QFC, and there is a line of potato chips and soda down an entire lane, and an aisle, and I cannot get over that. And I realize that I think they call it cultural hypnosis, that it's part of the culture. You just buy into the fact that it is okay because you're not making a choice. You're not being conscious about it. And I believe that we think that it's okay to buy a huge bag of potato chips from Costco and eat the whole thing because it's just there and because everyone else is doing it. So if you don't bring that level of awareness into why am I buying this bag of potato chips or why am I smoking this cigarette, then you're just going to continue on with your bad habits because you're not bringing any awareness or focus or thought to it.
And you know, one of the themes there is perspective. So you going out of the country are seeing things from another people's point of view. So then you bring that perspective, and you still have a residue, and then you look and you go, whoa, if you almost like channel, if I were, a Peruvian woman looking at this, it would be outrageous.
Right. It is outrageous.
I once, a theater person, also I was a stage manager in my earlier career, and we hosted this troupe of Russian actors, I remember, in Atlanta. And this was when it was like they were behind the Iron Curtain. And so I was driving them around, and I brought them to the grocery store. And it was like you said, we went down, and there were so many versions. I can't remember what it was. It was potato chips or something. And I saw it because I was visiting with them. And that's what's great about cultural exchanges and the kind of work you do. It brings a different perspective. I was looking at it from their perspective, just seeing how many, different sponges or whatever. And I had never seen a grocery store like that with, through those eyes. So it made me, multiple emotions of like embarrassment and just feeling like totally materialistic. And they were actually, in a little side story, they didn't have dryers. Like they had to dry stuff out on a line. And I remember putting a sock in a dryer, and they were like, that comes out dry? I'm like, whoa, okay. So you get to see things from other people's perspective. And in that way, you also get to get back to basics in your own mind, get a basic awareness. Because like what you said, which is a great phrase, cultural hypnosis, that's subverting our mindfulness.
Right.
So we need to get back there.
Right. And I think that there's a big change happening now, at least in the North American culture, where there's a lot more people talking about wellness. They're talking about meditation and mindfulness, and they're talking about healthy habits. Whereas before we were just, I don't know. We had our heads in the sand, and me included. I don't, like I said, I'm on a path, but at least I'm aware enough to know that I have probably 1,000 choices I can make in a day, and I try to be more thoughtful about those choices. And I think as a society we are moving that way, which is a great thing. I mean, meditation, even a year ago, 2 years ago. People weren't talking about it so openly, and now they are, and that's a great thing.
Yeah,
that's an excellent thing. So,
yeah, definitely.
So let's go back to. So we talked about kind of the practical path in terms of kind of a general sangha, the community of the Buddhist community. In your work, well, what is an agile team coach? And then how do you bring that practice to your team?
Great question. And it's like a lifelong of answer. So I'll try to kind of give you the path. I was a theater stage manager in my early career, and then I was a project manager. So project manager in the traditional, what's called the PMI sense, like project managing, you're managing resources, time, and scope. Basically, everything's you're trying to force everything to just, you have a plan. You make a plan, and then you have to stick to the plan. And if change comes, you fight it. You fight change. You're just like, no, that's not how we planned it. We look at my beautiful Gantt chart. And in project management, you have these Gantt charts that show you along a timeline just all the beautiful interdependent things that are happening perfectly. And they call it waterfall. So it's like this Gantt chart that just waterfalls one activity into the next. And
it looks like a big spreadsheet for people who haven't seen a Gantt chart.
Yeah, it's like with lines on it that says, okay, like for instance, you're making a skyscraper. It's like you lay the foundation, and then perfectly at this appointed moment, you're now ready to, build the walls. And so you have this fantasy plan as if you're actually in control of all the elements. So what happens is you get attached to the plans, and then these things come up, and you just get miserable. So that's called kind of traditional waterfall. Then so I was project manager. I worked in high tech. I worked for Silicon Valley companies, for Yahoo, Microsoft, and LinkedIn. And then I found this thing called Agile methodology, which is 21st century management techniques, philosophy, evolution, that says that change is something that is natural and you can't fight it. And you might as well take advantage of it. You might as well acknowledge change happens. And so in planning, what you do is you have plans. So as an Agile project manager, you have plans, but you plan points in there where you reflect, and then you adjust. You reflect and adjust so that you actually say, we're going to do something for 2-week sprints, we call it, and then we're going to pop up and say, okay, what's changed? Our priorities change? Is there some new piece of information that needs to come in? Let's welcome change, and then let's make a plan for the next spurt or a sprint. So basically, I'm a team coach, so I help companies. I'm currently helping a company basically break their company down into small cross-functional teams that are much more responsive to change in the marketplace. It's a much more creative way of working instead of just my left brain has said this plan is makes sense and it's rational, and then not acknowledging the right brain messy creative chaos thing. So Agile helps to give a structure to allow for creativity. So I work with companies wanting to adopt this new methodology, and I help them kind of design or architect, as well as then work with the people to be empowered, cross-functional. It's very, very much into honesty and candor. You don't just tell your bosses, "Hey, we'll get it done. We will, no problem. You said it needs to be in a month. We got it." And then a month comes and it's
so there's more accountability.
Yeah,
with
accountability.
It.
It's got a lot. So became interested in that. Became kind of a subject matter expert and got some accreditations. All the time that I was teaching Dharma.
Well, I was going to say when you kind of heard about Agile, did you immediately make the connection of like, oh my gosh, this is like the Buddhist path? Like you have to be agile with Buddhism, and did you make that connection immediately?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I think what it did is that both Dharma and Agile resonated with me, and then I made the connection that's why it resonated, because I'm really into hyper honesty. Like radical honesty, it's like, let's open our eyes and accept what arises, and then work from there, rather than this delusional, like I never felt comfortable saying, okay, this is our plan and it's going to work out exactly like that. I'm like, I've just seen too much to see no. And I'm really, and as me as a person, I say every day I get up, I think, oh, these are some things I want to do, but there are things that I have no idea. And I will really be in the moment with people, with situations. So that's what, so I would say that it's more of a personality trait or personal traits that saw the brilliance of Buddhist teachings, that things change, that things are impermanent. And also in business, knowing that I, as a traditional project manager for 5 years, wondered why every project failed. It went over budget. People had great ideas late on in the game, and it just failed because it was set up with an assumption that was faulty, which is that we are in control because it's come out of our left brain and it's looks perfect on a Gantt chart, that's the way it will actually play out. So I saw, in a way, Buddhism and Agile pierces through a delusion that we have as human beings, that we can basically, that have more control than we actually do over circumstances in our lives.
Do you think that are there younger people who are Agile team coaches, or do you think it's something that attracts a little bit older demographic that has had that experience and realizes that, like, the Gantt chart is not the way to go?
Well, it's interesting, that question. Like, it's the same thing for a Dharma teacher. There are young Dharma teachers and older Dharma teachers. I think there's, just like anything, there's maybe an attractiveness of Agile methodologies or Dharma from young people and old people. I would say, though, I think when I turned a certain significant age, I think it all came together, and there's a maturation, a maturity that I think really makes me effective because as a team coach and as a Dharma teacher, because I have experience. Also, you get to a certain age where you're not just going to play the game that people tell you that you need to play. When you're young, you have to, get married and you have the career and do this. And then when you get to a certain age, you're like, you know what? I see through that. And as I can also say, as a gay woman, I've always been able to see a little more of that social enforcement.
Right. Cultural hypnosis.
Enforcement. And I've always been a little outside of it.
Right.
Which allows me to continually push the edges and hopefully bring myself and bring the people I work with to new ways of thinking, because I've never been completely hypnotized, to use your word.
So if we can go down that path, because I'm interested in that as a gay woman, and I don't know, so I'm really asking from a place of innocence here. You have felt in your life, I'm putting words in your mouth, a little bit of an outsider.
Yeah,
maybe.
Definitely.
So you're
less susceptible to social conforming.
Okay, so the marriage, the house, the kids, the 9-to-5 job, maybe whatever it is, kind of, you haven't fallen into that.
I never from when I was in high school, like it. So I always have been. I don't want to say an outlaw. That's like, but always a little bit
outlier.
Offset. Yeah.
Okay.
And can I just tell you also, being able to see through that illusion that's created. That's where also my theater training comes in, because I actually got into theater in high school because I really like to be behind the scenes. Like, there's the illusion creators, and then there's the people that are fooled. And I remember first time I ever did anything in theater, I made this little Christmas ornament that went on a tree on the stage for a Christmas show. And I remember it was like tin foil on cardboard, and I was stapling it, and I put it up there. It was like a little Christmas ball. And then I sat out in the audience, and I was watching a show where people were singing, dancing, and I could see my ornament, and I knew behind that there were staples and it was tin foil. And I really enjoyed being behind, knowing the pieces that put together the illusion, than being the ones totally hypnotized by the illusion. So I've always connected that to Dharma, because Buddha teaches us the mechanics of the illusion that's created, and there's many different layers to it. So Buddha's wisdom is about getting rid of those layers of delusion. And so there's, in my mind, I've just in reflecting, I've connected those together. So I'm really about just seeing behind the illusion and how it's made. I also grew up in Hollywood, California, Tinseltown.
Yeah, a lot of illusion.
You just realize the people's jobs are to create illusions and create fantasies that don't actually exist the way they appear differently than they exist. And that's one of Buddha's teachings on emptiness, is to look and talk about the way of looking, like you're talking about how when people travel, they start to see things differently. But an emptiness, in Buddha's emptiness, what you're doing is you're acknowledging that the way things appear are not the way they actually exist inherently. So you're seeing that there's a little bit of a trick of the mind, and then you can start to deconstruct it. And in deconstructing that's where you get to truth. It's an illusion. An emptiness teaching has many different layers to it, but it's really acknowledging the way things appear are not the way they exist. Just like that Christmas ornament appeared one way, but that was not the way it existed. Mm-hmm. It had staples and tin.
So do you think that you were attracted to Buddhism because of that, in part by the Hollywood upbringing, and saying, oh, there's all this falseness, this kind of veneer going on. Let me get to the level of truth here.
I think so. I think there was a thrill for me in that, in being on the inside, and an energy, But what's interesting is I think I've had spiritual imprints for early on, because I remember even, before I lived in Hollywood per se, but I remember going to see the movie Jonathan Livingston Seagull when I was 11 years old, the Cinerama, and that was, if you recall, it's Richard Bach, and it's about a seagull that wants to do more than just eat garbage out of a dumpster. He wants to fly high. And he gets this guru seagull and tries to break norms. I remember seeing that, and afterwards my dad asked my sister and my brother, oh, did you like the movie? Like it was just a regular movie. And I was speechless. I could not, just the idea, it was a whole, like a guru experience of this soul of this seagull that wanted to fly high and not just be trapped in this cycle of suffering of just eating garbage.
Interesting, at 11.
Yes, at 11. So I remember that. I remember that it just really impacted me. And actually, Richard Bach was, I think, one of my first gurus. I read Illusions, his book Illusions,
yeah.
And I would know that if I could think with focus, that I can make clouds move. There's something in the book where it's just, there is a definite connection between what's appearing and my mind. And then I just took it from there. I think through music also. I think music was my first spiritual guide. Cat Stevens, the song Morning is Broken. I remember one of my 8th grade English teacher playing it for us. And that just broke open my world of music and spiritual. Like Cat Stevens is like On the Road to Find Out. And through Joni Mitchell, Neil Diamond, some others like that just really propelled me to then that moment that I was 27 years old looking for a spiritual path.
So do you remember, you said, because I know you mentioned earlier that kind of in your 20s and 30s, there was something kind of lacking that you wanted you wanted more. You remember a time at 27 when that kind of struck you and you said,
that's when I saw that ad for Universal Compassion, Buddhist meditation teachings, and I on the back of this the weekly at the time, and just was clutching, and then found my teacher and Kadampa Buddhism, and then made a connection with Geshe Kelsang, and these very practical modern Buddhist teachings. And I grew up in California in the 70s, so there was my mom was into kind of different spiritual adventures like Est and kind of and Buddhism. She kind of flirted with it, but I saw her path. What she kept being a seeker, and was completely not ever content. So I use her as my example. So because I can see that there's one quote I heard that really impacted me. It says, "There are many spiritual paths. Don't die choosing." So there are many spiritual paths. Don't die choosing. So I remember finding Kadampa Buddhism, finding that it had so much depth that I could never exhaust it for this one life. And I feel I have deep faith, and I know that if I really apply myself, that I could make some progress in this life. So I just chose and just, really let myself go into that.
So you saw your mom, you said she wasn't content, and she was kind of dabbling in a lot of different things.
Just skipping like a stone on the top of
Right.
many different spiritual traditions.
Do you feel content?
I do.
Uh-huh.
I do. Obviously on some level it changes moment by moment, but I have no, I don't have that fundamental lack of contentment of, oh no, what is my spirit? Where am I going to find? What's the perfect
Right.
guru spiritual path? And they're just being jerked around here and there. I find Buddha and Buddhist teachings has everything that I need in this lifetime. It's not the only path for everybody, but like I was on the road to find out, to quote Cat Stevens, and I feel like I have no itchy. I don't have an itchy mind about like being meditating in the Buddhist tradition and like thinking, oh well, I could be doing this, and no. It's really more just about me fending off worldly distractions that are is what I have to spend a lot of energy on, rather than wishing I were doing something else spiritually.
So what distractions do you feel like you need to fend off? And I know we don't have to get into the politics
True
of
confessions.
it. Yeah, but I know we just got past an election that's left the country divided. It's left family members divided. We're heading into a time that's uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
So is it that, or are there other, or is it kind of big picture, or is it more, I can't stay away from Facebook? You know what?
It's a little bit of everything. The act of going inwards and meditating is such a radical act. It really is, to say, I am going to be still physically. I am going not to want to be anywhere else at this moment. Now, that's the biggest thing. When I guide meditations, I try to remind people there's nowhere else you need to be. So just cultivating that's radical. There's nowhere else you need to be. And talk about contentment, being completely content. And then having that, in that void, thinking, oh God, I need to pay my bill, or I got to go to Trader Joe's or whatever. So I think it's, for me, one level is really just enjoying, I actually do love watching good quality TV and movies. Instead of reading books, I told you I just read mostly Dharma books, but then I get my fiction or character-driven type things from movies. So I think one of those things I can do the binge watching as good as anybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I am aware just of the impact. It's almost like the tax. I have to pay a tax. The more I get absorbed into some other life or some other, character, story, world, essentially. So I know that that's going to cost me when I'm meditating, just being absorbed into other kind of mental activity. But I do enjoy it. You have to relax,
Right.
and relax your mind. So that's, I love food. So thinking, sitting there meditating, thinking, oh God, think of how much mental energy we spend thinking about what we want to eat or make, that kind of thing.
Or just think about, in general, just think about all the mental energy we spend on a problem that doesn't exist, or a conversation that doesn't exist. Having conversations with people that aren't there, basically.
Yeah.
We make it all up.
Yeah.
I want to get back to, you said meditation is a radical act. I've never thought of it that way. And I actually think by saying that, it's pretty intimidating. Because if I said to a friend, hey, you should maybe try meditating. Like, meditation might help. It's really helped me a lot. But then if they heard that it's such a radical act, it's not easy, right? But I've never considered it to be a radical act, because, I don't want to think of it that it is that difficult.
Well, there's many different ways to think about the word radical. Radical doesn't necessarily mean different. Doesn't mean difficult, but radical in that the stream that we're all in our culture, in our society, is moving against. We have to move against the currents in order to go inwards, and I will stick by that because. Just even this morning, I did a meditation. I had to tell my spouse, okay, I'm going to meditate now. I had to ignore my phone that was ringing. I could hear on the other side of the house. So it's radical in that it needs to be intentional, and you are going against the grain, because you will never have the majority of forces in your life, in our society, in our culture, telling you to turn it all off, turn off the commercials, whatever, and go inwards to the commercial-free, beautiful space of your mind, where it's free and where it actually is free. It's freedom going inside. So that's where I would say it's radical, but I see it more as an attractive radical thing. Right. But you do need to know that you've got to have energy to go against the current. So I wouldn't want to delude people into thinking that you're not going to struggle with basically all of the other forces in your life. But what it is, it's about being healthy, and it's about doing something that it's not interacting with other people. So your spouse will, now I have to be without them for 30 minutes. But it's definitely, you can overcome it. Because what I did, like when I first started meditating, I thought I could never meditate. And I actually take classes like 3 times a week. And like, you think externally on paper, there's no way I could do it.
Right. You don't have the time for it.
Yeah. The minute I made the decision, it was effortless. It was effortless because it's a priority, and it was really important and meaningful. And then I found that basically easily the people in my life, my partner at the time, just knew that I'm going to go meditate. So you can train the elements of your life so that there's space.
Right.
But you do need to create space. It's not going to create itself.
And I think that's like anything. It's exercise, or eating a new way and having to shop at a different grocery store, maybe go out of your way and go, to the produce, the place that specializes in produce. And at first you think, there's no way I have time to do that. And then, like you said, you create the time for it because it becomes a priority. And what I have found in terms of meditation, and I've probably been meditating fairly regularly for maybe 7 years or so, and certainly not as regular as you are, but I'm fairly good about a practice. What I have found is that when I started dabbling in it, there was a result. to my meditation. I knew that when I meditated, I had a better day, that I didn't react as much when I was in traffic or when someone pulled out in front of me in traffic. And then I started realizing that the even if it's 10 or 12 minutes that I spend meditating, I gain 45 minutes not being wrapped up in my head later in the day because I'm so pissed that the package that was supposed to arrive, UPS, never arrived, and I'm on the phone. You let things go a little bit easier. Would you agree?
Yeah,
with
definitely.
That? Yeah.
And you would accept wholeheartedly that FedEx doesn't always deliver.
Yeah, not wholeheartedly, but mostly.
You got to let go of the idea that things should be any other way.
Exactly. Right. So then I can gain time in the day because of that, because I'm not holding on to that kind of thing. But I think I don't want to try to convince anybody of anything, but I think it's trying to show people that if they did take that time, that it's not wasted time at all.
And let me just, to bring that point home and to touch on the recent election, is that, the day after the election, it was devastating. People were devastated and scared and confused, and it was really like almost a natural disaster. I mean, in some way, for some people, I'm sure. But I had a student, one of my meditation students, actually called me and said, I just want to tell you, I meditated 3 times that day, and it really helped. And it was because we get so down the road of our delusions and the anger, and then it's all so elevated and we're so close to it. It's just in our face and it's overwhelming. And what he found is he just brought his mind to his breath and got perspective, got space. So there's not only is it useful on a regular basis, but then you're training yourself so that in natural disasters or unnatural disasters, you have a go-to mind.
And one other benefit from that, and I don't know this person, but I think kind of broadly speaking, is that when you are spending time meditating or contemplating or whatever you want to call it, whether if there's someone reading a Bible, if they're spending that time in whatever spiritual path they're on, that means that it's time that they're not spending doing something else.
Well, spinning up, the mind spinning up.
Yes.
Which is what all delusions have one thing in common, and that's an exaggeration. So the closer we get to things, the more exaggerated and the more heightened it gets. So reading the Bible or contemplating or taking a walk in nature.
Right. And I think you and I
de-escalates that.
Exactly. And I think you and I had a brief exchange, ironically, on Facebook about I think that next morning I went for a run, and I just thought, I said, I don't want to do something that's not healthy for myself, because I realize when we're unhappy at the news or by world events or by local events, we tend to do things that are not healthy for us. And whether that is, watching repeats of Law and Order, or
eating bonbons,
or it's drinking, or whatever it is, we have habits that give us a quick fix, and then for the long term, that long term could be 2 hours later or an hour later, or it could be over time. We end up not feeling good.
Yeah,
we end up feeling worse.
Yes, yeah, it's
exactly.
Temporary.
So I think if we can go to meditation, or we can go to something, if we can take that pause and do something that's healthy, then
I agree.
We're all much better off.
Yeah, and Buddha called it changing suffering. We go to, for instance, we might be hungry, and so then we eat, and then there's a certain point where it's actually satisfying, but then we eat too much, and then it's changing suffering. And then we wish that we don't eat for another, 2 days, and then so it becomes this cycle. So it's not solving the problem.
No, and then we spin on that, and then we feel bad about ourselves, and then then the escalation that you talked about.
Yeah, but we can solve or as Buddha taught us, solve our human problems by looking at them with awareness, and then by applying actual methods, internal methods that reduce and eliminate the actual sources of suffering, which are not outside of our mind.
Just to, we'll wrap up here shortly, but I have a question about, in keeping with the Be Bold theme here, your path. Would you say that your family and your friends, maybe from 11 onward, because you brought up being an 11-year-old at Jonathan Livingston Seagull movie, are you kind of maybe a black sheep or a little bit of an outcast in terms of the path that you've chosen in terms of Buddhism? Would that have been a bold move in the eyes of your family, or is it just kind of like, that's Linda. We know Linda. What is she doing now?
So bold moves are big and small, and I think many, like a bold move of coming out as a gay woman in my teens. Actually, that was pretty bold, and I think spiritually, what's interesting for me, because I grew up in, as I said, California in the 70s, and my mom was experimental, I didn't have any enforced religion. So I didn't have to cast off an evangelical, Christian past or any other expectations. I had a lot of independence that way. So I think the boldness, in a way, you find boldness. You can find boldness anywhere. Boldness might be actually sticking with one path, seeing it through. I have a twin sister, and she is actually very spiritual as well. Her tradition is more Hindu-based tradition, and so so it wouldn't be I didn't have to break out of some religious prison in order to find Buddhism.
Right.
So I was very fortunate that way.
So it was a natural, in California too, things tend to be a little bit more progressive and open there.
Definitely.
So it was an easier path. Yeah. It wasn't like you grew up in Iowa and it was a complete break from the society.
Yeah, and I think, and being over 50, I will come out to your listeners. I think the boldness, and when I was talking to you earlier, I really liked it, where it's like not assuming that your life is almost over, but to think, okay, what's the next robust chapter of my life? Yeah. And not giving in to the limitations of that your body is, telling you, oh, it's time to slow down. Of course, take care of yourself, but don't take that to a conclusion that your life is over. But really be bold and saying, how am I going to write this new chapter of my life?
I like robust.
Yeah.
I like that.
How am I going to write my new chapter now that I have such wisdom? The boldness is really actually achieving your potential. Or, if that's too intimidating, just advancing your potential. And that, like for me as a Buddhist practitioner, I'm not like, okay, I need to attain enlightenment before I die. I'm like, I need to be closer to enlightenment than I was when I started this lifetime. And that, then you can just dive into that with robustness and then feel content. I did everything I could to live in the moment, to live without limitations, without expectations. And then at the end of my life, that's my greatest desire is to be at the end of my life without regret.
Do you have a bold move in the coming, let's say, 12 months that you have on your mind?
Oh, God. Put me on the spot.
I should have warned you.
I'm in a point in my life where I just got settling into a new job, and I'm teaching Dharma, and I feel like I'm pretty content.
And you just celebrated your 1-year wedding anniversary too. That's
yeah.
Great.
So I feel like I'm in this thing where I practice. I'm pretty content, but to me, that's where I get nervous. Being a child of divorce, also, I'm like, okay, once everything's perfect, that means it's just about to change. But for me,
yeah, but you should know from Buddhism that it
it will change.
Yeah,
Exactly, and that it's not a bad thing.
Right.
But for me, I think the bold move will be to continue to recommit every day to my spiritual path, and to get further along. And so I think, because I've got the spouse, I've got the high-powered job, and it's pretty intense. And you're talking about worldly things. I use my mind a lot as a Agile consultant. So managing that and really remembering that the arc of my life is as a spiritual practitioner. Like, that's the backbone, and everything else is just hanging off of it. So really, I think the bold move is to stay connected and committed, and then actually doing some more silent retreat, meditation retreat, and basically some more retreat. And actually, right now it's January, so it's retreat month. So it's starting to think about, I'm going to do some teaching, but then also do my own spiritual practice that's definitely more meditative.
One last question for you. If you didn't have to earn money, what would you do?
God, that is so funny, because just today, I was driving up to my house and I was thinking, because I have lottery tickets I haven't cashed. So, everybody has the fantasy. I'm like, what if I could be a millionaire, right? I could,
yeah.
And maybe if it's maybe 12 million, would I have to keep my job or whatever? And I drove up and realized, I think I'd really still keep my job.
Really?
Because, and this is a whole nother conversation, but I feel like my Agile coaching is connecting Dharma to people that need it, that might not ever go to a Dharma center. And I mean that in that Agile team coaching helps everybody understand themselves and then be able to help others. Like, there's a lot of things in there. So I think if I didn't have to work, I would definitely spend more time developing the West Seattle branch as a possibly its own temple. So,
right. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and do some team coaching for this entertainment company, and go on your trips.
Yeah, please. Yeah, come.
That one in Santa Fe was sounding really interesting.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the wellness trip that I'm working on for Santa Fe, which will include meditation and yoga and ways for women to just become more contemplative and make mindful choices about everything that they do. So so please.
Yeah, so I'd have more of that.
Good.
If I was independently wealthy.
Yeah.
Didn't have to work.
Let's run out and check those lottery tickets.
Yeah, definitely. And then, I can maybe, extend, bring all the listeners.
I know, that's a great idea. Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes if you end up winning, so everybody can know. They'll all start knocking on the door at the meditation center.
That's great.
So, Linda, thanks so much for being here. It was
welcome.
great to we've known each other for a long time, and but it's been great just to have a much more in-depth conversation with you and get to know you better.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks so much for having this wonderful venue for people to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to become bold, and also to really become fully themselves.
Yeah, hopefully.
And their potential.
Yeah, that's my wish for myself and everyone else.
Great.
So great.
Very noble.
Thanks. That was really special, wasn't it? That's the kind of episode that I could listen to over and over again, because there are so many pearls of wisdom in there. And every time I do listen to it, I pick up something new. You can find out more about Kadampa meditation centers, and I will say that they're located throughout the world in the show notes, and that's at wanderlustandlipstick.com/podcast. You can find out more about me by visiting Wanderlust and Lipstick, as well as Wander Tours, where you'll see the tours that I lead around the world. I encourage you to also check out the Wander World Foundation. That's the nonprofit I founded to help women and children in developing countries. And I'll put links to all those sites in the show notes as well. Friend me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, and write a review. This really helps the podcast to get more exposure, and ultimately, it's my desire to grow our Be Bold community, and this is one really great way that you can help out. Please also share this podcast with friends and on social media. I bet you have at least a few friends who could benefit from what you heard on today's show. Don't forget to use the hashtag BeBold on your social media sites. If you know of any high-performing, adventurous, philanthropic women whom you think might be a good guest, shoot me a note or leave a comment. And finally, the ladies can join us on our Be Bold Facebook group. That's where you'll find our community. It's where we share goals, talk about our setbacks, and where you can find words of encouragement and inspiration from others. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.